Next, from Springfield, we talked to Representative Jeannie Ives, the House sponsor of Senate Bill 9, on why she, a Republican, is sponsoring a bill intended to raise corporate and income taxes. This runs about 15 minutes.
Representative Jeannie Ives, thanks for joining us again on the All Night Channel. As we tape this here in the Capitol, it is the day after the Senate passed SB-9, which is a bill that would raise about $5.4 billion, it's estimated, in new taxes that would be raising the income tax and raising the corporate tax, and as I understand it, applying a sales tax to some services that are now not taxed. Interestingly, you're going to be the sponsor in the House, and we wanted to talk to you about why that is, because it seems incongruous given your political philosophy that you would be the sponsor in the House. What can you tell us about that?
Well, it is true that I don't really represent a tax increase on taxpayers. That's not who I am, and that's not what I've stood for. In fact, I came down to the State House to really protect taxpayers, but when I saw that SB-9 was going to be the vehicle that they used for a tax increase, I wanted to be part of that conversation. So I knew that if I pre-filed for the bill, that I would have potentially a voice on that bill when it came over to the House. And sure enough, I am the chief sponsor of a tax increase bill. However, we plan to amend it heavily and to protect taxpayers rather than increase taxes on them.
What do you know, the thought is with a lot of people is that when the income tax was rolled back in January of 2015, and that cost the state roughly $4.5 billion or so. Subsequently, we now have 14 and counting $1 billion in unpaid bills. People say we need to have that revenue. Do you agree with that? We need to have that revenue, and what changes would you maybe look to make in the SB-9 in the House?
I don't agree that we need to take more revenue out of our businesses and our taxpayers right now. And here's why. We have essentially, the reason we've accumulated $14 billion in back bills is because we never put in place the structural reforms necessary to have a balanced budget. Now, $31 billion plus is sufficient to do right now what I would call, it'd be a little bit of an austerity budget given our back bill situation, but it's something that the taxpayers expect. They expect us to get spending under control. They expect us to put in structural reforms so that we don't build up these huge deficits. I mean, we haven't had a balanced budget since 2001. We got into this mess over decades. It's going to take 10 years to maybe get out of this mess, but the last thing we should do is a massive tax increase on businesses that are already leaving the state of Illinois. We need to put the horse before the cart here and do the reforms first.
How are we going to, with all that $14 billion that's incurred by hospitals, nonprofits, doctors, K-12 education, where they're not getting funded for things like the school bus transportation, the categorical grants. How are we going to make them whole? I mean, if I was a printer who had done printing for the state, I used to be in the printing business, I'm trying to meet payroll. How do I make payroll when I'm not getting paid from the state, and don't we have an obligation to pay those off, those $14 billion?
I'm really glad you asked that question, because I do feel it's immoral to hold that much money in debt, and especially expect our vendors, who we contracted with, to actually extend their lines of credits just because we're not paying them on time. I do find that's immoral. I'm not disregarding that. I'm saying right now you cannot ask for more money from the taxpayers, because last time we did this, it all went to pension payments, or 90% of it did. We need to do pension reform, we need to do Medicaid reform, we need to do government reform in total in terms of what they are able to do for prevailing wage rates, collective bargaining, things that would streamline government consolidation. We have 860 school districts. We need to consolidate those all to just unit districts. We need to save taxpayers money at every single level of government. Then, once we've done the structural reforms, you can go back and say, we're not going to get into this mess again. And I would be willing at that point then to actually take on some bond debt and pay off our back bills, because right now we're paying 12% on all the back bills that we owe after 90 days. So we could save money if we did bond out that, but you cannot do this until you've done the reforms, because it's also going to go, any money we collect would just go to a broken system that we have not reformed.
let me play devil's advocate.
Sure.
So some people would say, look, the governor has, they might say the governor's right. The governor, we need to have these reforms. The state was screwed up before he came in. That's why he was elected. On the other hand, they would say, right now you got 2 weeks to pass a budget. If we don't, there's probably going to be another credit downgrade. It's the taxpayers that are paying that 10 to 12% on the unpaid. So it's not the state that's taking, getting hurt by this. It's the taxpayers. So the faster we bond that out and stop the bleeding, we're helping them. I guess the point that people would say is, can't we pass a budget and then address these things that we haven't addressed in 2 years? We can't get all that done in 2 weeks, but we can continue. In other words, instead of the budget being the destination, it's maybe the beginning of the trip, and let's get that, stop the hemorrhaging, and go forward.
So we've passed minor pieces of a budget in the previous 2 years. We've done certain carve-outs for universities, we've passed a K through 12 budget the first year. We did a stopgap budget last summer, and all that did was build our back pile of bills because we never took care of the structural issues. That's why taxpayers are demanding real reform before you ask for any more money. And so that's where we stand. I mean, we're going to have this fight sometime. We should have had it last summer for sure, but instead they passed a stopgap budget, which I never voted for. I was one of four who knew all we were going to do is accumulate back bills, and that's what we did. And we didn't get another budget. We passed a stopgap in the hopes that we're really going to get a full budget. It never happened. And now we find ourselves 6 months later in the same thing. We're going to have this fight at some point. And I think the taxpayers are still with Rauner. Everybody in my district that I talk to says, we need reform. We're tired of being taken advantage of, and we understand what's going on here. Government is way too big. You find me somebody in Illinois that doesn't think that government is too big. I'll tell you what, everybody I talk to says, you do what you want, Jeannie, we're leaving. Our kids are almost out of school, we're leaving. So here's the real truth. The real truth is, if we don't decide to fix this, the market's going to fix it for us. They're going to downgrade our universities. The universities are going to not open if they don't have a budget. In many cases, the kids will continue to go to other states for their education because they can find it cheaper there. And oh, by the way, kids have been leaving the state of Illinois for education in other states for long before Governor Rauner got in place, long before we had this budget impasse. Higher education in Illinois is just simply unaffordable for the average family. So this predates Governor Rauner's, and this is a problem that we have to have. This is a fight we have to have right now on downsizing government, consolidating higher ed. Quite frankly, we need to consolidate it. We need to consolidate the number of community colleges. We need to consolidate the number of school districts. We better have this fight now, because we're fighting for our survival right now. Otherwise, the market will do it.
If we don't have a budget, last year we at least funded, or actually so far we funded K-12, but we may not fund K-12 this year, which means we won't know, the school administrators won't know if they can open the schools come August. What are the parents going to do with their kids in school? I mean, all of a sudden, how are they going to go to work? Or is it, this was where we're at the brinksmanship to where, are you arguing, or not only you as an individual, but the Republican side of the aisle, let's say, arguing that we need that pressure to finally get the kind of reforms that you're looking for?
So there's many, many people that just simply want a budget. And our caucus really doesn't want to go with a stopgap budget. There's many of us in our members that we really feel like we need to have a full budget. I mean, all of us feel that way. We want a full budget. But we all know that we were sent here also to make sure that government works long term and that we can't continue doing what we're doing. Look, last April, we lost 7,200 jobs in the state of Illinois. We lost 17,000 people who just gave up starting to look for work. So our workforce decreased 17,000 people. We can't continue down that path. So workers' comp reform really is important. I know it sounds really dry, but it's important. Property tax reform is really important to both individuals and business. Other structural reforms with Medicaid, reining our expenses, controlling this, we have to have this fight. When else are we going to have this fight? I don't know how this ends. And in fact, I would argue that nobody in this state house right now knows how this ends. But the truth is, we're pretty much bankrupt. And certainly, Chicago is at junk bond status in a number of its entities. They can't afford what they've got going. Chicagoans need this reform just as bad as the rest of the state.
And that's something people should understand. The city of Chicago, for all practical purposes, is bankrupt. They're just not declared bankruptcy.
That's correct.
The state, for all practical purposes, when you look at the pension, unmet pension debt, is, not to mention the unpaid bills, is bankrupt. And so I think that's an objective viewpoint. That's not a matter of opinion.
Right.
That's just the facts. Looking at how much money is coming in and how much money is going out.
Look,
we can't continue this way.
Sure. Let me tell you about a couple things. One, last week you had a bond house basically come in and give a select group of representatives a briefing, or legislators a briefing about, look, if you guys go to junk bond status on your universities, we're really at risk for our bonds that we sold you. So we want to know what's going on here because we're really at risk. Additionally, you have now 5 bills from the Senate side and the House side that have been put in place, basically intercept of state money going down to local governments because the bond houses are nervous about getting paid. And they will not lend anymore unless they have a secured lien and a secured stream of revenue. And the only revenue stream that they think is secure right now is state intercepting state funds. So state local distributor funds, state sales tax, state motor fuel tax. And so they're trying to get a secured first priority lien on that debt. Why? Why are the bond houses wanting this type of legislation? Because they know better than we know what the future holds in this state 2-3 years from now, that we really can't afford to make these payments. So they're nervous, they're looking to secure this, and that's a horrible idea for taxpayers because that money is meant to go to services, not making bondholders the first priority in a bankruptcy.
So let me not keep you any longer. Let me ask just one last question. We saw in the Senate, Senator Radonio working with Senator Cullerton trying to come to some alliance and get something done. Where are you in the House? How far apart are the Republicans and the Democrats? Are we still at loggerheads, or do you see any kind of a cooperative mood coming in light of everything we've been talking about?
So there's no conversations happening up at the higher levels between the House Republican caucus and the House Democrat caucus. There's no conversations being had. I was told, though, however, that there was a bit of a meeting between the Senate Democrats, the Senate Republicans, and the House Republicans on budget matters this morning, and that conversation is going to continue tomorrow. So it sounds like the House Democrats are not involved in those discussions, which, since we know that Speaker Madigan kind of runs the show here, it sounds like it's really up to him to come to the table at this point, and let's get an agreement going.
If I might, there was something I wanted to ask. And speaking of SB-9 and you being the sponsor, and Speaker Madigan made a statement last night that was very non-committal about taking up the SB-9 that passed the Senate. It is historically his modus operandi to come up with his own budget and kind of drop it on the desk at the last minute. What does it say to you, since he runs the show in the House, that you are the sponsor of SB-9 from the Senate? Does that say to you that he doesn't want that to pass?
That's a very interesting question. So if they were to try, because procedurally they could take SB-9 from me and change it to a Democrat sponsor. They have not approached me yet to do that. They could also take that same tax language and put it on another bill. Maybe they're planning on doing that. But I actually think that he's not interested in doing a deal. And he's not been really interested or involved in any of the Senate negotiations or discussions. So I think what you're going to see again is possibly the Democrats in the House come out with their own budget, but not have the revenue to support it. We've seen that same thing happen last year, the year before. And when you think about this comprehensively, we've not even the House decided on a revenue number, put it into a resolution, and passed it unanimously and in a bipartisan way. And that is the start of a budget process. That is how we did it before Governor Rauner entered. We started with a revenue number. The House has refused to adopt a revenue number. So I think that they intend to just do their own budget and not have the revenue there. So he may not be interested in SB-9.
Jeannie Ives, I'm sure we could talk at length more. Maybe we can do it another time, but we appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right.